What does it matter to ya when you got a job to do? You gotta do it well, you gotta give it the other fellow hell. You used to say, live and not live. You know you did. You know you did, you know you did. But if this ever-changing world in which we live in makes you give in and cry, say, live and let die.
Julia entered the round building and moved down the walkway between the rows of the audience and approached Her Majesty, who sat not too far from the stage. The daughter looked much older than her mother, which had to be the rule, rather than the exception, on the other side. Her mother explained this fact to a visibly astonished Julia.
This looks weird, Julia, I know. People live longer and longer on average.
It is weird, Mom, but I understand. What I don't understand is where is Vidlovsky, my dad? I've imagined you two together for a long time now.
Not waiting for an answer, Julia instantly visualized the gaze of the eternal Beatles fan from the rusty yellow submarine and recognized him as the very, very old, almost ancient Widlowski. She remembered a legend circulated throughout the years about an eternal Beatles fan, and some kind of immortality deal or curse, depending on how one looked at it, made with Harihara and Yama. Julia now understood that the wandering fan was Widlowski, and she ran up to the Beatles to ask them about an entreaty, to which the Beatles nodded with comic gravity, then smiled and pointed at each other.
Yes, we're all together now. It's some sort of a reunion. So what?
Abby then ran up to Harihara and argued with him about his curse on Widlowski and Her Majesty, pointing at the Beatles, who nodded in enthusiastic agreement.
I have to admit that my curse is now void, as its conditions of the Beatles' reunion are met.
But the fair yet austere Yama didn't see why he should take Widlowski off their bargain about Droog.
Widlowski agreed to be an immortal, eternal Beatles fan for his friend's Droog's sake. And eternal means forever and ever. Last time I checked, the forever has not yet ended, and it never will.
But Her Majesty is now here, so how would they reunite to resolve the end of Harihara's curse?
I disagree. In order to resolve this paradox, I need somebody to take Widlowski's place as an eternal Beatles fan.
Julia decided to make her own sacrifice and bargained with Yama, almost the same as Widlowski did a long time ago.
Yama, please! And his eternal life, let him reunite with Her Majesty and with Droog in the Beatles' heaven. In exchange, take my own mortality and let me serve as the next eternal Beatles fan.
As long as someone carries that weight, I don't disagree.
Julia stepped out of the concert hall and saw that it had been cast away from the shore and was floating in the delta of the River of Life, separating Beatles' heaven from hell. The old rusty yellow submarine had drifted toward it, and Widlowski tied it up to the moor. Julia told Widlowski that he's finally allowed in. He smiled happily and took her hand to step up from the boat. But when he saw that she was going to jump onto that same boat, he understood what had happened, and not wanting to get Julia's sacrifice, started to fight her, trying to get back in the boat and push her back inside the concert hall. Yet his strength of a 125-year-old man was not enough against a much younger 100-year-old woman, and he had to surrender. At the last moment, he took a small photo out of his suitcase with Beatles mementos and gave the beaten-up suitcase to Julia. Once he entered, the inside of the concert hall now looked like the Chervona Square, and he was slowly moving through the crowd of people towards the stage. He had to pass rows and rows of Harihara's police, who stood with their backs to the stage, watching the people instead. Widlowski was intently looking for Her Majesty. She, too, was expectantly looking back toward the entrance where Julia had just exited and where he was coming from. Her Majesty happily opened her arms to him, and they quickly embraced and kissed. When she saw a photo in his hand, which was actually a half, she took out its second half, and they put the pieces together to make whole that old photo of the Beatles in a boat on a river, the one she had given him at the parade way back in 1964. As the Beatles started to sing back in the USSR, sounding weirdly similar to Schmedel's, a commotion appeared in the whole Chervona Square in front of them. Very much like at that old parade in that old totalitarian country which no longer exists. Or does it? The chaos rocked the whole Chervona Square, which evidently became a large boat on a river. Harihara, who was sitting in the first row with his deceitfully nicer face towards the stage, turned his ugly second face around and saw the freedom-inspiring photo. He tried to reach Widlowski and Her Majesty, but rocked with the whole square, fell, and the crowd took him to Yama and his four-headed, multiple-eyed dogs. Widlowski pulled Her Majesty close, feeling her warmth against his chest as they swayed together. This time, they didn't float up into the sky or swim in the river. He wasn't going to sail away off into the distance or float above the world. Instead, Widlowski opened his eyes from a long daydream and joined the world around him. Widlowski and Beata danced to the music as they continued playing and singing, letting loose completely. Her laughter was lilting between verses, and Widlowski matched it with his own, while their friends continued to play all around them. As the crowd roared and cheered from the lawn, their loved ones were there as well, watching them. He swore he even heard singing from the outside.
Can I get to the bottom? I can see you again. Yeah. Helter skelter. Helter skelter. Yeah.
Stop that.
The crowd had ballooned, their voices reaching to the stage where they played. Even the faculty had joined the students in singing and dancing. Widlowski and Her Majesty flew up above the Chervona Square, up toward the skies along a very high tower, and saw the Beatles performing the yet unpublished song Now and Then from its roof. Widlowski looked around, smiling at his friends, lost to the music that enveloped them and spread out to the crowd. He could see Julia standing with Margaret and Clara, all watching them play. He wasn't surprised when all three of them sang along, too. Beata opened her eyes and looked directly at him, and Widlowski looked right back as her voice swept around him, as if she were singing just for him and nobody else in that moment.